The One Punch Man universe has some of the craziest, strongest, weirdest, and straight up psychopathic characters I've ever seen. But one that stood out from the rest among all of them was Tatsumaki. Because it's like, what do you mean a little kid pulled down a freaking meteor from the sky? That's just insane, right? So I started thinking, what if I gave that power to Naruto? But it made less sense there. So I was like, Deku? And everything just started clicking. Because if I'm being honest, the story literally wrote itself, which in my opinion is what made it as good as it was, because a lot of you, and I mean a lot of you, really enjoyed part 1. So much so, in fact, that you guys were hammering for me to drop the ending of this story. So it's finally here. Sorry for the delay, but like in the last one, if this video somehow manages to break 2,000 likes, this time I'll keep my promise, then I'll consider dropping another One Punch Man X My Hero video. And it could really be anyone. I mean, we're talking Saitama, Genos, Bang, Puri Puri Prisoner. It doesn't matter to me if I'm being real. I'm just trying to get some views. But anyways, just a heads up, this is a collab video, so check out my boy's socials down below in the description if you enjoy his part. But with no further ado, enjoy. Alright, before we start this video, let's just get 2 things straight. Number 1, Inko is going to matter a lot for this video, and number 2, Inko's also going to happen to be the number 2 ranked hero in My Hero. So how does that happen, some of you guys might be wondering. Let's get into her backstory. The reason that I wanted to do something with Inko in this timeline has more to do with the fact that she already has a telekinesis quirk, so pretty much taking advantage of her quirk, passing it on to Deku, but as something stronger, I figured that that would have made for the perfect way of giving Deku Tatsumaki's abilities. So let's cover how that happens, why don't we? Alright, so for this specific timeline of events, Inko is not going to be having a very happy beginning to her life, because when she would be 16, she would fall in love with a no-good kid by the name of Hisashi Midoriya. Now, Midoriya is kind of a jerk, right? And she knew that, but she loved him because he said all the right things, he bought her all the right stuff, and he always took her out on dates. He treated her well when at home, she was pretty much made to cook, clean, and do your stereotypical girl activities at home. So with that said, her feeling love, she kind of falls for him really hard, and this eventually leads to both of them making a big oopsie by the name of Izuku Midoriya, which for her would be a blessing, but for the dad, he would be like, alright, I'm out. And yeah, he leaves her life. This essentially ends up leaving Inko to fend for herself with the young boy. And so seeking aid would, find the best things possible, eventually managing to get them both a very bad apartment, with her having to work 2 jobs and a whole lot of hours just to keep them afloat. And this would be the usual for Inko in her life for the first 1.5 years that Izuku would be born. So one day, as she would be rolling the boy in her stroller, making their way to the 99-cent store to get a couple of groceries, this is when out of nowhere a random villain attack would commence. Who the villain is, what he looks like, or what his power is, doesn't really matter. But what does matter is what triggers in Inko from this moment. Because realizing that all she could do in that moment was cower in fear, begging that the villain wouldn't harm her child, she would sit there feeling completely and utterly hopeless. Luckily, however, there would be a random group of thugs who, seeing this, would have been like, hey, leave the girl alone, as they proceed to beat on the man, rob him, and stuff him in a trash can. This would kind of just leave Inko in shock, realizing that there was no heroes around, and if those guys weren't there, who knows what would have happened to her, but even worse, Izuku. And with this interaction having left a question in Inko's mind, this would be something that she would start wondering over and over, realizing that if she wants to protect Izuku, she's gonna have to do it herself, considering that Inko doesn't exactly live in the nicest part of town. That said, every single day, Inko would start to train on her relatively weak telekinesis quirk, at first believed only able to drag small objects, until Inko, through training it every day in small, minuscule ways, would eventually learn that her quirk actually has a lot of potential, because at first it started by lifting a control towards her, and then slowly started to divulge into Inko being able to actually lift up chairs. This would stun her because her training had only consisted of about a week consistently pulling objects towards her, and she's made this big of an improvement. She would realize that the quirk that she had thought to be relatively weak and not fit for heroic work might just have a little more to it than meets the eye. And so, after training for an entire entire year, every single time that she would be working her shift, she would be lifting some objects in the kitchen. At home, whenever she was watching TV, Inko eventually would get to the point where she could lift all of the furniture in the home at once. So through this consistent training, eventually she would realize she had gotten very strong. But never having understood just how strong, she obviously never knew the full potential of her quirk, nor did she really want to find it out, because in her eyes she wasn't training to be a hero, just to defend themselves, and so long as Inko could keep people at bay, that was good enough for her. This, however, wouldn't last too long, because very soon she was going to have to face off against a real villain. And unluckily for her, it was actually going to be the next day, because tomorrow was going to be the National Take Your Kid to Work Day. So Inko, making her way towards the normal side of town, where unfortunately there's a lot of villain incidents, Inko, on her way to work boarding the train, would be sitting down with Izuku, playing with him, making faces and playing peekaboo with the boy, as he's, kind of just sitting there going, oh, like so cool, like those baby sounds that they make that they're like absolutely adorable. He's doing that. And all the while this would be taking place, this is when out of nowhere, 3 dudes with like these like very stereotypical looking trench coats and like hats, fedoras basically, stand up and they're like, all right, everybody listen up. You're all gonna hand over your valuables or the train goes boom. It being revealed that these guys were actually duplicates, a guy having the ability to create 3 duplicates of himself with 3 different personalities. Sort of a washed down version of Twice, basically. At hearing this, a man on the train would go, wait, if this guy does blow up the train, does that then mean he'd be blowing himself up? He's bluffing, come on. Everybody, who's with me? Let's not give him anything. In fact, I say that we all rush him right now and take him down. And so everybody would get up and be like, yeah, he's right. Some of them started to activate their rather weak quirks, with the guys all 3 in unison waving their fingers, saying that this isn't the real body. And if they choose to make things difficult for them, then he doesn't mind killing all 300 passengers. As with that being said, everybody immediately pipes down. Like literally, they all form into a big line, them all not understanding what's going on, until they all get closer and closer, realizing, damn, we're being robbed. And Inko, not really having too much on her, being like 7th in line away from having to hand over all her things, holding the young Izuku, not taking a chance to leave him alone, she saddened with the look on her face, would hold out the only money she has, staring at it, realizing that if she gets robbed, they're gonna get kicked out. She had already asked for an extension from her landlord, so she just can. And so Inko, closing her eyes and just thinking about it, that she might just be able to stop these guys, would then think to herself that she has to do it. And so, using her telekinesis ability, she would rip away the control from the men before slamming them towards the back of the train and holding them up, kind of like forcing them to like levitate a little bit, like choke forcing them kind of. All 3 of the men are like, what's going on? As Inko, looking towards them, would say, you're gonna give everybody their valuables back. I won't let you villains rob anyone else. To which onlookers seeing this would start clapping, going, we're saved! We get to get all our stuff back! People recording Inko, and the incident going absolutely viral. Inko's face would be all over the news, and when she would report to work a few hours later, her boss would call her into the office. Inko, he would say, as she would sit down and go, what'd I do? He would then say, you're a hero! I never knew I had such an incredible employee working for me, but I guess it makes sense. I do hire the best after all. He would look towards her, telling her that she is actually gonna get a little bit of a raise. And Inko, smiling at this, would say, what, really? Thinking that, oh dude, this is the best. Like, I guess good things do come to those who do good things. So as Inko and, Izuku would make their way home later, this is when suddenly Inko would have a knock at the door late night, and as she would go to check, she would find that it's actually a police officer. So Inko, recognizing this and opening the door, would say, yes, hello? As the police officer looking towards her would say, your name is Inko Midoriya, am I right, ma'am? To which Inko would nod, and the man would say, well, to keep it brief with you, ma'am, after the incident that went viral with you in it, the police would actually like to take some information from you and get a better account of what had actually taken place. Inko would nod, asking if he would like to come in, and he would say, well, actually, ma'am, we need you at the station. But she would say that she can't possibly do that she's taking care of her son Izuku, and when he wakes up at night, who will be there to tend to him? So Tsukachi would be like, I guess we could do it this way. Sitting down and she's like, could I offer you a cup of coffee? And then, Tsukachi, sits down. He starts noting down the incident, asking questions such as when did this happen? How many villains were there? What made you act? What is your quirk? Stuff like that. And Inko would start answering all the questions, being extremely nervous, asking if she's in trouble. Detective Tsukachi just looking at her and saying not at all, that because she was acting under Article da-da-da-da-da of the police force, that she's actually okay, noting that her actions were incredible, and that because she caused 0 damage, she's actually gonna be awarded a check for saving so many people's life. It's a bit of a gift from the police force to her. She saved the city a lot of money and it doesn't really cost them too much to help her out. So Inko receiving this, she would get like a grand total of $3,000. Officer Tsukachi noting that her quirk is incredible and asking if she's ever considered performing real hero work, to which Inko kind of timidly would say that she hasn't, explaining that most of her life she had a relatively weak quirk, so she never thought she could do it, and it was only when she started training it at home, obviously not in an illegal way she would add, she figured out that it was a lot stronger than she thought. Tsukachi will tell her that be it as it may, he does have connections, and if she ever thought about being a hero and reliving that experience, then she can give him a call and he'll try to set her up with a provisional license. And so Inko hearing that would be like, wait, do you mean it? Do you really believe I have it in me to be a hero? Tsukachi would nod, saying that he more than believes that she has it in her. So Inko, smiling at Tsukachi, would nod, saying that she'll think it over. As the following days, as Inko would be at work, she would suddenly think that maybe being a hero would be better. It would help Izuku live a better life. And who knows, maybe it'll have Izuku look up to her even more. So Inko, realizing that she can get to live the fantasy of being a hero, would pretty much go to her boss, giving her 2-week notice, to both of her bosses actually, before then giving Tsukachi a call. She would live on the last paycheck from both jobs, and once that would be all over with, she would go on to attend the provisional licensing exam, which, considering just how many heroes there are, and how many actually garbage heroes there is, I have absolutely zero doubt that Inko would pass. So, shortly after receiving her license, she would request work at a pro hero agency as a sidekick. Now, what sidekick is she gonna be and to who? Honestly, I don't know, and to be honest, it doesn't really matter the story, because once she gets the hang of what it's like to actually be a full-time hero, she ends up opening her own agency within the year, and within another year, she goes on to become the #2 hero of Japan, not only because her quirk is incredible and she's actually capable of stopping a lot of incidents, growing her strength and her telekinesis abilities, able to stop entire trains and cars. She would blow through the ranks thanks to her humble personality and even her looks. Because remember, in this timeline, Inko never actually ends up letting herself go, and seeing as Inko sort of looks like All Might's mom, I'm gonna just say that he kind of looks like her in a hero costume. It would be green, kind of similar to the actual Tatsumaki outfit, just because I think it's a cool little homage to the actual character we're basing this off of. And yeah, she is the #2 hero. So by the time that Izuku would turn 4 years old, now we're actually gonna focus on the main character, Izuku would be going to school, attending the same place with Katsuki Bakugo, and as everybody else would start unlocking their quirk, Izuku would get worried, thinking that he might have just not gotten anything. However, as Izuku would be eating dinner with his mother, questioning her on how cool it was stopping that incident last night, Inko having literally stopped a three train collision that was about to kill thousands of people with perfect efficiency, literally nobody felt the trains come to a halt, Izuku would then be told everything about it, him being like, "You're the best, mom," idolizing her and All Might, her actually giving Izuku like a cool little sign thing of All Might, saying it's, she knows the guy, would be like the coolest thing ever. And while he'd be eating, eating with a spoon, this is when out of nowhere Izuku would drop it and catch it mid-air before it falls. Realizing that he has his mother's quirk, he would go, Mom, I unlocked my quirk. I have telekinesis too." So Inko, seeing this and seeing the very, very, very weak control that she has, barely not letting it hit the ground, she would smile, remembering the moment that she actually awakened her quirk. However, it wasn't even half as strong as that. The moment it happened for her, she made the spoon slightly shake, so most of her life she thought she was quirkless. It eventually got stronger over the years, and when she started training it, forget about it. But anyways, that said, she would take Izuku to the quirk doctor, where his quirk would be registered as telekinesis. Izuku returning to school the next day, where after everybody would ask him what his quirk was, he would proudly say he has his mom's quirk, telekinesis. And as everybody would be crowding around Deku, being like, whoa, you're the coolest, you have an even better quirk than Bakugo. Bakugo would suddenly say, better? What are you guys talking about? Show us your quirk, Deku. I'd love to test that theory. So Izuku, showing that he has the capability of like lifting a spoon slightly, Bakugo would say, that's it? My explosions here are gonna blow your quirk out of the water. Just wait and see, Deku. I'm gonna be number 1, and you'll be lucky to be even top 10 with a weak quirk like that. People would look at Deku being like, but he's the son of Inko. And Bakugo goes, son or not, I'm gonna crush him. I swear it. And so Izuku and Bakugo from then on would kind of have a rocky relationship. Bakugo refusing to hang out with Deku, and actually choosing to continue to bully him much like he would in the original. Because remember, Izuku's young, so Inko never had him start training her quirk. She believed that once he became older, he would start that. But due to Bakugo's insistent bullying and telling him that he'd be better off quirkless with such a garbage quirk like that, eventually leading to everybody else jumping on the train, and Deku eventually starting to come home with a couple of bruises on him, courtesy of Bakugo, Inko decides that maybe it wouldn't be too bad if she could teach Izuku a thing or two. So, from that day forth, at the age of 7 years old, Deku would now start training every day with his mother, her teaching him the exact same techniques that she had used to take her relatively weak quirk to a very formidable one. And Izuku pushing as hard as he possibly can, not only to prove everybody else wrong, but mainly Bakugo, Izuku would get stronger and stronger by the day, developing a kind of chip on his shoulder type personality, not wanting to upset his mom, because if his mom is the number 2 hero and he's letting himself get bullied around by Bakugo, what does that say about his mom? You know, he kind of hates the fact that he feels like a disappointment to his own mother. Like, he doesn't compare to her, and he really takes that to heart because everybody recognizes him as Inko's son, the son of the number 2 hero. And so, with Izuku's constant training, he eventually gets extremely powerful with his telekinesis quirk at the age of 9 years old, obviously reaping less benefits than Inko because his quirk was less developed due to his age. So he would have a fairly strong telekinetic ability, capable of pushing people back and, sending them flying. Nothing too crazy. That said, this is when we jump cut to a day where Izuku would be in line waiting for his lunch, and as he would get his stuff ready and make his way towards the table, this is when Bakugo would stick his leg out, causing Izuku to fall to the ground, his face being filled with the spaghetti and meatball special that honestly tasted like pure garbage. As he would look up at Bakugo, meatballs literally stuck in his eyes, falling, with Bakugo being like, you see that freaking loser? Can't believe he's the son of the number 2 hero. And Izuku hearing that and having enough of Bakugo's stuff, even though Inko had always taught him not to retaliate with more violence, Izuku would suddenly smirk, thinking that maybe he doesn't have to retaliate with violence, lifting up every single tray of food in the entire area, literally creating a telekinetic, cloudy with the chance of meatballs tornado, sending it flying at the direction of Bakugo, which in turn spreads onto the rest of the people behind him, a grand total of 11 people total. Izuku with this would start dying of laughter, looking at Bakugo and cracking a multitude of jokes at him, with Bakugo practically seething, just going, so Deku, looks like you finally decided to grow up here, huh? Guess it's a shame today's the day you die! Blasting an explosion at Deku's stomach, which sends him flying across the cafeteria, hitting his head on one of the nearby benches, pissing the boy off massively, as Izuku just swipes his hand into the air, pushing all of his telekinetic abilities, sending Bakugo crashing into 3 cafeteria tables, inevitably breaking Bakugo's arm, as Deku, walking over towards him, asks him to bully him now, before walking away, and everybody who was watching just being dead silent at the now fully defeated Bakugo. This ultimately culminates in the 2 students being taken to the office, and once there, this is when the principal would end up calling Inko, who was literally in the middle of her hero duty and had to be called to the school. So pulling up in her full-on hero outfit, she's like, what happened? Is Izuku okay? As walking in, she sees Izuku kind of just looking down, pissed off and sad at the same time that his mom is going to get the wrong idea, and this is when the teacher would go on to inform her that her son caused a fight, covered a bunch of people with cafeteria food, and to make things worse, he even ended up breaking Katsuki's arm. arm. Mitsuki at this point would say, "What the hell, Inko? Just what have you been teaching your son?" Inko kind of just bowing down in sadness, as after the story would all be taken from the people who were watching, which are pretty much Bakugo's Goonies, they all, thanks to the fact that they were covered in food and they're scared of Bakugo, would have lied, being false witnesses and leading Izuku's story not to be believed at all. So by the time that Izuku would be in the car with Inko and he would tell her, "Mom, it wasn't like that, I swear. Bakugo tripped me and then he poured food on me. What was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to just let him get away? I didn't fight him at first. I just sent a bunch of food at him to get him dirty." And Inko, hearing that, would say, "Izuku, I've told you not to answer violence with more violence. That doesn't help anyone. You could have ignored it. You're better than that." Izuku finally having enough of this, as he would yell back, "Why? All my life I've been ignoring him. He's made me a living punching bag, and the entirety of the school doesn't praise me for being your son. They make fun of me. What did you expect me to do? Just continue letting him treat me like garbage? Until when? Until he finally grew a consciousness and maybe decided to treat me with some decency?" To which Inko, just completely silent, would look at her son, seeing the look in his eyes, just angry. At this, Izuku would say, "To hell with that. I'm never gonna let anyone disrespect me again. I promise that. I'm done being a pushover." Izuku would bark before looking out the window. Inko kind of just saddened, knowing that might have been the worst thing to say to her son. But not really wanting to, ignite the fire even more, she just drops him off, saying that she'll be home in a few, returning back to her hero duties, stopping about 2 incidents, and then returning home, finding Izuku fast asleep, when in reality he was just turned towards the wall, not saying anything because he didn't really feel like speaking to his mom. That said, after this would take place, the next week Izuku would be transferred to a different school, and at said new school, this is when Izuku would finally live up to that promise he had made, reinventing himself and never allowing anyone to look down at him or make fun of him. This eventually leads to Izuku being a character that people don't make fun of and don't treat as a joke. Izuku would love it because now he would have friends, and he developed an attitude very, very similar to that of Tatsumaki. So he kind of develops a bit of a prideful personality, being a bit of a jerk to anybody who doesn't look at him in the same light he views himself, and also definitely would have grown in strength. So with Izuku's time finishing up in middle school and there being no sludge incident due to the fact that, remember, Izuku not going to the same school with Bakugo means there's no way he would take the same path. So no Sludgeville incident means no One for All Deku. But that doesn't quite mean that we don't get the 10 months of training, because Deku would definitely spend his time doing a whole lot of training, having found a beach covered in a bunch of trash, with Izuku using his telekinetic abilities every day after school to pick up as much of it as he possibly could. At the point that he would start his training, Izuku would have the capability of picking up, say, 2 tons worth of stuff, with by the end of his training, him now being able to lift up a grand total of 10,000 tons, give or take. I wasn't really too sure what the metric of a train being lifted, but I kind of want Deku to have the level of strength that Inko had about 3 years into her pro career, meaning that Deku is gonna be an absolute menace when bro takes the entrance exam, which is actually what I'm just about to cover, so let's get to it. Anyways, Izuku in this timeline, thanks to being the son of Enko Midoriya, means that in this timeline he won't actually be taking the same tests as in the original, because now he was gonna be taking the same test that Todoroki and Momo took, alongside with that wind guy, which, speaking of wind quirk, I just recently dropped the video where Deku had a wind quirk. It's a banger, go check it out. Anyways, shameless plug aside, Izuku making his way inside of this testing area for the recommendation students, he would find that their test was a lot different than the other people's, and so, using his telekinetic ability to fly, floating himself into the air, Izuku would proceed to blitz past Todoroki, tying with Inasa in terms of speed, shocking everybody by the performance of the number 2 hero's son, with Todoroki definitely taking note of the fact that that was Enko Midoriya's son, better known as Terrible Tornado. And so we would probably watch on as Izuku takes the test, not thinking about anything, all the while Todoroki in his mind would be having a competition with Izuku, trying to see who has a better control of their quirks. Todoroki realizing that Deku is honestly on a whole nother level, at least when it came to the exams that they actually had to take part in, which were mainly about obstacles, which Todoroki thought he would be the best at, but even Inasa was surpassing him in these tests. It was kind of strange for Todoroki. A weird feeling. But anyways, that said, Izuku would of course get into UA, this being a day to celebrate. Inko giving her son Izuku a really cool motorcycle that he could actually use to get to UA every day. Izuku would be a bit caught off guard by this. He's like, couldn't I just fly to school? And she's like, you still don't have your provisional hero license, so you're not going to be doing that, mister. How about you ride this instead? Giving Izuku a lime green motorcycle with a really sick helmet. So Izuku taking it alongside the jacket she had gotten for him, he would thank Inko, saying that he can't wait to show her just how strong he'll be going into UA. Inko saying that he's so lucky. Inko stating just how proud she is of her son and how far he's came, saying that never in her wildest dreams did she think she was going to be able to afford to give Deku these opportunities or even these gifts, and she's so happy. She bursts into tears as Deku looks at her and goes, "Mom, don't do that," getting a bit teary-eyed as the two have, a little embrace moment. And Inko's like, "I'm so sorry, you've just gotten so big," tucking at bro's like cheeks as he's just like, "Mom," and then finally they go out to dinner. But anyways, that being said, this is when Izuku the very next day, the moment he wakes up, he would grab a piece of toast, head out the door, and make his way straight to the school. Arriving there and parking his bike, this is when flowing his hair into the wind because he looks exactly like the Deku in the thumbnail, everybody would watch on as Izuku makes his way inside, and then walking over towards an upperclassman with blue hair in Nejire would ask, "Hey, you mind helping me find class 1A? She's like, "Oh, you're a first year. You look kind of cute." Of course. As she takes him to class 1A and he's like, "Was she flirting with me or is she just that nice?" Izuku would, put that in the back of his mind as entering the door, he would breathe in thinking that he's so excited to, before then seeing Bakugo. This would just ruin everything. It's like someone just took a dump in his breakfast, you know what I mean? And so staring at Bakugo, he's like, hopefully he doesn't notice me. But unfortunately for him, Bakugo immediately notices him, going, "So Deku, looks like your quirk actually allowed you to get into UA after all. Can't say I'm surprised though, seeing as mommy's quirk definitely helped you out in that department." Everybody hearing that would say mommy's, looking at his hair, then realizing, OMJ. "That's terrible, Tornado-san," they would all say. The girls in the class being like, "Oh dude, can we please get an autograph from your mom?" And the boys in class being like, "Dude, what's it like having such a hot mom?" All the while Aizawa would get up going, "Everybody shut up." Everybody immediately stays quiet, to which Izuku, looking at Aizawa, would then hear him tell him to sit down, before then explaining what they're here, that he's the homeroom teacher, and to put these on and get dressed. After he would go on to do that, everybody would meet Aizawa outside, where Aizawa would go on to tell them that all their lives, they have all been treated as though they're equals, but the truth is, they're not. Some people are just naturally better than others. And so today they're going to participate in a test that's going to let them know whether or not they deserve to be in UA. Uraraka, hearing this, would say, but aren't we already in UA? He's like, "Not for long if you don't pass this test and blow my expectations out of the water." Looking towards Uraraka and then the rest of the class, everybody would gulp, be like, As after this, he then tosses the ball towards the boy who had gotten highest score in the robot portion, being Katsuki Bakugo. And as he would catch the ball, he would ask what he's gonna do, the teacher explaining that he needs to toss it as hard as he can from that circle. How he does it, he doesn't care, only telling him one more thing before he throws it, telling him to go plus ultra. So Bakugo, gripping it tightly, looking back towards Deku and thinking that it's about time he showed off just how strong he's gotten since that day he was humiliated, he would reel his arm back and throw it as hard as possible, getting 100 more meters than he would have in the original due to that humbling experience that would have forced Bakugo to train a bit harder. That said, as everybody would watch on, they would get excited, going, "Whoa, we get to use our quirks? This is awesome," Kaminari would say, until Aizawa would cut him off, going, "Awesome? We have 3 years to mold you into perfect heroes, and your job is to save people's lives. There's nothing awesome about it. We're on time crunch constant, and if you don't take this training seriously, you won't make it in the big leagues." Before then smiling and giving the class the ultimate ultimatum. Whoever ends up last gets expelled. At hearing this, everybody brings their A game. And so, we would then watch on as they would do the 50-meter dash, Izuku getting an incredible score thanks to his quirk allowing him to move at incredible speeds, followed by the grip strength test, Izuku crushing the machine with his quirk, kind of bypassing the rules, then the standing long jump, which Izuku's able to simply fly over, and as for the repeated side steps using his telekinesis, he kind of throws himself side to side to side to side to side to side, until eventually low-key, he gets motion sickness and has to stop. After this would happen, Izuku would then be chuckled at by Bakugo, and then would come the final test, in which Bakugo, looking at Izuku, would mutter under his breath, "Good luck, number 2. To which Izuku would bark back, "I don't need luck, Katsuki. I got mommy's quirk, remember?" He would make his way into the circle and then double Bakugo's throw. Bakugo getting pissed off, Izuku actually being higher than Bakugo during the exams. After everything would be said and done, class would end, and as everybody would begin packing, making their way home, this is when Bakugo, appearing behind Izuku, would tell him not to get a big head, that those tests don't say anything, that in real hand-to-hand combat, that's when they'll find out who the stronger of the two is, adding that he better prepare, because he plans on embarrassing Deku thoroughly. But Izuku, looking at Bakugo, would simply walk right past him, saying, "Yeah, we'll see about that, Katsuki," before walking by and muttering, "You stuck-up prick." Bakugo hearing that and saying, "What was that, Deku?" To which Deku, glowing green, looking at Bakugo about to use his quirk on him, would then be stopped by Aizawa, who at canceling it would say no fighting in this school, explaining that if the two want to hash it out, then they better do it during their training, going on to tell them that this is their first and last warning, and that the next time something like this happens, he'll be sure to expel both of them. Izuku with this would calm down, getting on his bike and riding off. Bakugo simply staring at Izuku, pissed off at just the kind of person that he'd become. Truth be told, he had half expected Izuku to remain just how he was when he had bullied him, but now it seems like he's actually grown a spine, and Bakugo hated it, since after all, he did miss his punching bag. But in Bakugo's head it didn't matter, because he would be getting it back real soon. The first chance he gets, he swore he would destroy Deku. And it actually wouldn't take long for him to try that, because very soon, they would be holding the hero versus villain exercise. And with All Might entering the room like a normal person, the countdown had already begun. And with the students revealing their pro-hero costumes, Izuku coming out in a black version of his mother's hero costume, he would be ready for this. Excited to test his hand against whoever his opponent is, hoping realistically that it would be Kacchan. And with him getting paired up with Uraraka, he'd be kind of happy, seeing as in his eyes, the girl was kind of cute. So going over to her to introduce himself, her saying that she knows all about him, that she's a huge fan of the tornado hero. Izuku smiling as she asks him a couple of questions about her mom, when suddenly Bakugo would give him a stare down, holding a block that says that they're going to be going up against each other. Izuku and Bakugo would both give each other a look of "I'm gonna kill you." Izuku just smiling as he would think to himself that he's getting real freaking lucky today. And so, him pretty much letting Uraraka in on that rivalry they have, her questioning why they look so serious, Uraraka would understand. "Oh, so it's a battle against fated rivals. Alright, I'll try not to get in the way." And Izuku would smile at her, saying thanks, as they enter the room, and now everything would begin. Bakugo in this moment would tell Ida to protect the bombs. Ida saying, "What? You're not gonna stay here?" Bakugo just going, "Shut up, Four Eyes, I've got business to handle. Just make sure that bomb doesn't get caught by that girl teammate of his." And so, with Izuku and Uraraka making their way up to the second and third floor, Izuku just kind of walking through it, recognizing that he'll probably have an easier time fighting Bakugo on the inside of the building. This is when, out of nowhere, hearing the sounds of an explosion getting closer, Izuku would say, "Come on, Bakugo." Bakugo blasting through the corner and going, "There you are," shooting an explosion towards the direction of Deku, with it instantly being snuffed out. The moment Bakugo's explosion spark in his hand, Izuku's able to use telekinesis to essentially blow the force of the explosion backwards. So it's kind of like Izuku's blowing out a candle, and Bakugo, recognizing that his quirk is quite literally useless, his face would have a look of, "Oh no," as Izuku would smirk, looking at Bakugo before using his telekinesis quirk to slam him into one of the sides of the walls, slam him into, like, literally head first into the roof, and then throw him through the bottom floor. So now they're in the second floor, and Izuku, jumping down, would hold Bakugo up with his hand, kind of similar to what Darth Vader does, asking Bakugo what he intends to do now. "Use that weak little explosion quirk of his," he would say, but Bakugo would simply just be staring at Deku with the look of, "Damn you," as Izuku simply smiling and literally making Bakugo slap himself in the face. Izuku would say, "What? This is all you can muster? The great Bakugo didn't get any stronger since middle school? What a joke." Bakugo just saying, "You're lucky I can't use my quirk." But Deku at hearing this would say, "Oh, so using your quirk would make you be alright, awesome. I'll stop snuffing out your explosions. Come on, Bakugo, try to hit me with it." So releasing Bakugo on the ground and him kind of like holding his face would say, "You sure about this, Deku? Because I'm about to slaughter you." As he would then go on to pull one of the pins of his gauntlet, letting a full explosion full of all the sweat that he had trapped in that moment. Izuku, recognizing that that was not so good, would then use his telekinesis quirk to create a sort of barrier in front of him, stopping the force of the explosion to actually reach him. However, this would cause a plethora of damage to the building, Bakugo then lunging towards the direction of Izuku in an attempt to blast the explosion. However, Izuku would retaliate to this by pulling down the floor of the third floor and hitting Bakugo over the head with it. This would stun the boy, as Izuku would then use a telekinesis powered punch square in his stomach, sending him crashing out the second story window onto the floor. Bakugo being completely unconscious, with Deku scoffing, saying that honestly, he's disappointed. He thought Bakugo would be a whole lot stronger, especially with how much bark he had. But he guesses Bakugo is just an average case of all bark, no bite. So with the battle now being over, Izuku using his intercom speaker would say, Uraraka, you copy? She would say, copy Deku, I'm in the bomb room with Ida, hurry up, quick, he's about to capture me. Izuku just be like, oh crap, as he would fly out the window that he just literally sent Bakugo crashing out of, flying over to see which room the bomb was in, crashing in there, using his telekinesis to pull the bomb towards him, touching it with his hand, as Ida would have been unable to react, that happening so incredibly fast that the only thing Ida would have heard was, Hero Team wins! Ida just sitting there stunned, like, how did he? As Izuku picks Uraraka up and says that it was a pleasure working with her. She would like kind of blush a little bit, going, oh, don't say that. I did nothing. As they eventually make their way to the room, and this is when a breakdown would go down about their performance. Momo would say that Izuku was the MVP, though in her opinion, she thinks he took things a bit too far with Bakugo. All Might would say that he definitely did, but he would be handling that after class. And as we would see Izuku return back to the room with a very confident smirk on his face, some of his classmates would be a bit weary of him, kind of scared honestly. If he did that to Bakugo, what would he do to them if they fought? And some people would choose to keep their distance, but not Mineta. Bro was honestly sitting there next to Deku going, hey, we should hang out after school. Is your mom gonna be there? Izuku looking at Mineta, giving him a death stare, saying, dude, if you mention my mom again, I'll use my telekinesis to stretch you like putty, causing a mortified Mineta to finally leave Deku alone. Izuku then once again having people look at him being kind of scared of him. Izuku though wouldn't care, so long as they respected him, it was fine. Plus, these weaklings aren't even on the same class as him. And with that finally being said and class being over, All Might would call Izuku into his office saying, young man, may I have a word? He would then go on to ask Izuku why he had taken things so far, saying that though he does share his mother's quirk, the way that he handled that situation was a bit barbaric. Inko would have never done that. Izuku would say that's because my mom's soft, but Bakugo's been getting on my nerves for years. Plus it's not like I killed the kid. Sure, I might have roughed him up more than I should have, but he'll be fine, won't he? All Might would nod, saying that he'll be fine, but that still doesn't mean he should have taken that far. And Izuku would look at All Might saying, whatever All Might, it doesn't really matter what you think, since pretty soon, I'm gonna be taking that #1 spot for myself, All Might simply looking at Izuku and realizing that, oh wow, Inko's son is a lot different than her. She would send a text to Inko saying that she might want to have a talk with her son, and when Izuku would arrive home, Inko would be waiting for him with a bit of a worried expression. She would speak to Izuku saying that while she's proud of her son's strength, she doesn't want him to use it to belittle others. She would remind Izuku of what it felt like when he had to deal with Bakugo, and Deku would say, what? I'm just at the top of the food chain now. Isn't this how I'm supposed to act? Inko would say, I never acted like that. And Izuku would say, yeah, well, times are changing, Mom. It'll be fine, I promise. I'll chill out if it really means that much to you. And Inko hearing that would smile, saying that that's all she wants, for Izuku to just relax a little. Izuku hearing that would smile once again, before then asking, so, what's for dinner? Inko then signaling towards the kitchen chef, with Brian being like, oh, today I made beef stew. Izuku would be like, awesome, and so all of them would dig in. As this would happen, the very next day at UA is when they would end up having that whole little incident where the media would break in. And Izuku in this timeline, after not having been picked as class rep due to his personality change, would proceed to show a different side of himself, realizing that the media is the reason this was all going on, as he would pick everybody up in the vicinity, going, calm down. Can't you guys tell that it's just the media outside? How they broke in, I don't know, but you guys are UA students. Act like it. Before floating them all down, them all being like, damn, did he just lift us all up? With people recognizing that Izuku actually has the makings of a leader. So Ida going over to him after this whole incident would be over, he would bow saying that he is far better than him and he believes he should be Clash rep. But Izuku would say that he doesn't want to deal with the hassle of that and that he makes it an incredible Clash rep. He already has the look. So with Ida hearing that, he would simply watch as Izuku walks off, making his way towards the table with Uraraka, and Ida would follow suit, saying, "Are you sure?" With Izuku saying, "I am, but if what you're looking for is a friend, then I don't mind sitting with you." And Ida would kind of just sit there, being like, "Thanks, Midoriya." As after this, they would all have their lunch and walk home from school together. With this, Izuku would arrive home where he would give Inko a sheet saying that it's a permission slip and that they're going to be hosting the USJ event pretty soon. Inko seeing this would say, "Oh, that's awesome," saying that rescue training is some of her favorite hero work to do. And Izuku hearing that would say that he bets it is, saying that he's excited as much. As we would then jump cut to the next day, Izuku finding himself on the bus, just kind of looking out the window, excited for what's to come, when out of nowhere, Kaminari, who had been sitting next to him, would say, "Dude, you got anything to add to that?" Izuku completely oblivious to the conversation around him, which would have been about who's the strongest in the classes. Izuku, now finally understanding what was going on around him, would say, "Oh, that's me, of course. What, is that even a question?"
Don't you think that's a bold way of putting it, Izuku? I mean, yeah, everyone can see that you're strong, but just because you think you're the strongest, that oftentimes doesn't mean you are.
Izuku, looking at Froppy, would say, "Alright, so who's stronger than me?" Looking around, pointing at all of the people in the classroom going, "Are you stronger than me?" Like looking at Tsuyu, she's like,
"Well, no, my quirk probably is worse than yours."
And Izuku would say, "Alright then, so is anyone stronger than me?" Pointing at Bakugo and going, "You guys think he is?" And then pointing towards Todoroki and going, "You guys think Mr. Number 3 here is better than me?" To which Todoroki, hearing that, would stare daggers into Deku's eyes. But Deku would simply just look at him with a cocky smile, going, "Easy there. We don't want you freezing the bus while we're still on our way to the USJ. I guess we can figure that out another day, but I'm confident that I'm the strongest in the classroom." At hearing the bravado and confidence, some people would be off-put by this. Uraraka thinking that, hey, I mean, he is pretty damn strong. She saw it for herself. She would look towards Deku, she's sitting in front of him, and go, "Deku, I think you are the strongest." Izuku looking at her and saying thanks, before they would finally arrive at the USJ, and this is when Izuku, looking around, would be like, "Damn, this place is massive. They've got everything," he would think, looking around, seeing the water, the fire, the landslides, before then beginning to wonder to himself if this is the kind of stuff that Inko takes care of most of. He would wonder which scenario his quirk would be more useful in, and he would think that he actually probably would do very well in all of them actually. He could control the rocks that are falling in a landslide, he could save drowning civilians by using his telekinesis, or save people from a burning building by holding the infrastructure solid, allowing people to escape. He would think that this is about to be a good opportunity to show everybody that he truly and utterly is top dog. However, as this would happen, the Pro Hero 13 would make her entrance and she would begin giving her speech. About 3 minutes into it, Izuku would finally interrupt, being like, "Blah blah blah, can we just start the training already?" As 13 would stare at Izuku, wondering how to even reply to something like that. However, before she even gets the chance, this is when the League of Villains would arrive, Kurogiri's misform appearing and him staring at the heroes saying, "Well, heroes, apologies for arriving, but it seemed we weren't invited." Izuku, looking at the villain that had just arrived, would question whether this was part of the... However, as he would do this, a portal would open underneath him, attempting to suck him right through it. However, Deku, resisting, using his telekinesis quirk to fly, would retaliate best he can, sending Kurogiri flying, all the while the portal would finally suck him through. But the next time that Izuku would open his eyes, he would find himself stuck in water, him looking around and recognizing that there was at least 20 villains. So Izuku, floating himself out of the water, looking down and using his telekinesis quirk, Izuku would float not only every villain but Tsuyu and Mineta into the air. Izuku, recognizing some of his classmates are there, as he floats them back to land, and looking at all of the villains who were all just like, "Whoa, let us down, kid! What's he doing? What kind of quirk is this?" All the while Izuku would simply smirk at them, saying that it's about high time that they were taken care of, as he would begin to use his quirk to cause them to ram into each other until inevitably all of them would be knocked out, then placing them on top of the boat and wrapping up up some rope that was nearby around them, Izuku would float up into the air looking around to see who else needed help, recognizing that if he was teleported, who knows how many other classmates were. However, as Izuku would scour the situation, he would recognize that Aizawa was struggling with villains, having about 30 of them coil around him, all attempting to catch him off guard. Izuku, seeing this, would smirk, seeing this as a perfect opportunity to show off to Aizawa and always hold something up on him that he saved him. So, floating all of the villains into the air and causing them to literally be sent flying out of the USJ, like crashing onto the ground wherever it is that they would land, Izuku would smirk, telling Aizawa not to worry, that he has his back. With Aizawa simply looking up towards Deku, telling him that he needs to get back with the students. However, Izuku would say that there's no way in heck he's gonna be doing that, as more villains would once again begin surrounding Aizawa, and him using a scarf in conjunction with his eraser quirk would hold them back. It's at this point that Shigaraki, watching Aizawa hold his own, and the addition of this new brat who took down 20 members instantly, would start scratching his neck going, "Kirigiri, summon the Nomu." A giant bird-brained creature would arrive, Izuku staring at it and just thinking, oh, what is that? Shigaraki chuckling, just going, "Hey kid, wanna see something cool?" As he would say, "Nomu, kill Aizawa." At this point, the Nomu that had been standing still the entire time would lunge into action, wrapping its arms around Aizawa as it proceeds to crush Aizawa's head, then hitting him with the knee to the face, sending the pro hero crashing, his glasses being sent to the ground as a bloody splatter would then appear. Izuku, seeing this, would be horrified, realizing that Aizawa must have been using his quirk in that moment. That thing is a monster, he would think. So, attempting to keep the Nomu away from Aizawa, Izuku would use his telekinetic abilities, slowing the Nomu down as much as possible. But to Deku's surprise, the Nomu would continue moving towards Aizawa, not allowing itself to even be picked up or pushed back. It was simply struggling to move forward. And Izuku, seeing that the Nomu was that strong, he would say, "How in the?" Shigaraki cackling before saying, "The Nomu's an incredible creature. He has a multitude of quirks, hero, so if you think a weak telekinesis quirk is gonna handle it, well guess what? You're wrong. The Nomu's a scientific experiment gone wrong, and the only one capable of potentially harming this thing would be All Might." Shigaraki continuing to cackle as he would say, "But he's not," as his mouth would shut and Izuku would say, "Shut up, I'll get to you later." Shigaraki getting pissed that a literal kid just did that to him. All the while Izuku would yell out, "Aizawa, I need you to use your quirk erasure on this behemoth. Maybe with that in conjunction with my telekinesis, we'll be able to take this thing down." And Aizawa looking up towards the Nomu, hair beginning to float as one of his eyes would start shutting from the pain of literally getting his skull like caved in practically by the Nomu. Izuku would say, "Aizawa, don't give up." Aizawa's eyes starting to like faintly flicker, the Nomu beginning to get even more invigorated as it would start moving faster. Izuku being like, "What? You shouldn't be able to," as the Nomu, eventually getting closer towards the direction of Aizawa, would raise its foot in preparation to crush his skull. And Izuku, pushing his telekinetic quirk to his absolute limit, would barely manage to hold the Nomu's foot up, dragging Aizawa as far away as he could before now staring at the Nomu that's attentions were now set on Deku, after Shigaraki would have yelled, "Focus on the brat, Nomu. You can kill Aizawa afterwards." So now, the Nomu would start like slowly lunging at Izuku, kind of looking as if he was doing that like running in place type of thing, and Izuku's like stamina slowly draining, him using everything he could, face literally going red, veins bulging, would say, "There's no," the Nomu eventually breaking through as it would slam its fist into Deku's stomach, sending him crashing throughout the ground, literally like ricocheting like a freaking pebble. This man would be on the ground, head bleeding as he'd be concussed, and as he would look up, vision blurring, he would see the Nomu walking closer and closer. Izuku, once again activating his quirk, would try to fly away, but the moment that Izuku would create some distance, it would be as if time would seemingly stop for him looking around to see everybody watching him run away, as one thought would ring through his head. "I'm Minko's son! I can't run away." He would turn back, now putting on a brave face as he would think to himself that he acted like a coward, using his quirk to try to levitate the Nomu, but the Nomu would simply dig its hands into the ground, not allowing Deku to do that. As eventually through a tug-of-war battle, the Nomu would start to be lifted, Nomu screeching out as Shigaraki exclaims, "How is the kid doing that?" before suddenly Izuku's energy would start to be drained, and Izuku, recognizing he doesn't have much time, would start using his telekinetic abilities to rip off both of the Nomu's arms, rendering it useless. As the arms would slowly be getting torn and the Nomu would fight it, Izuku would push past his limits, nose starting to bleed, as pushing all the force into that Nomu of ripping its arms off was genuinely taking everything out of Izuku. And as Izuku would push and push and push, the Nomu's arms would go flying off. Izuku finally dang near passing out as he falls to the ground, and the Nomu would do so as well, screeching out as momentarily its arms would heal. Deku watching on as the Nomu was seemingly unaffected, all the while Shigaraki would cackle. "Did you really think the Nomu would be taken down so easily? You foolish brat! Die!" he would say, the Nomu rushing towards the direction of Izuku, about to punch his head to smithereens. However, before that punch would connect, All Might would appear, tanking the blow with his stomach, throwing a punch square at the jaw of the Nomu, sending it back a few inches as Deku would look up, seeing the scene unfolding before him. At this, Izuku would be stunned. All Might, he came, he would think, his body unable to continue keeping him awake. Izuku just passing out as the original battle between All Might and the Nomu plays out once again, and Izuku would wake up a few minutes later on a hospital stretcher. They're tapping his face going, Kid, are you okay?" And with the villains having escaped, All Might having ran out of his time limit, this is when Izuku, inside of the hospital stretcher, would have his mom land right in front of him, her going, "Izuku, are you okay?" As everybody's just looking, seeing Inko, the number 2 hero, Mineta's like, "Oh, I can finally clear up clothes," taking a money shot from his phone, all the while Inko would look at Izuku, feeling his face and having her hand covered in blood. Izuku would say that he's fine, as tears would then start welling up in his eyes looking at his mom, and he says, "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought I was strong enough, but I let you down." Zinko would stare at Deku in confusion going, "Son, you didn't let me." But Izuku would just say, "I did. I carry our last name, and everybody knows I'm your son, and I lost to a freaking bird brain monster. You would have taken that thing down easily. Mom, I need to get stronger. I can't lose like that. I'm supposed to be at the top of the food chain," Deku would say. Inko looking at her son, who's broken, beatered, and just tears welling up in his eyes, as Inko would say, "Izuku, you've already surpassed me. There's nothing left to teach you," she would say, Izuku's eyes going wide, never having realized that could have been a possibility. But now, recognizing the seriousness in her eyes and the tone of voice she used, he would just have that one line echoing through his head as he'd be in the hospital and his treatment would be done. Izuku would think, I surpassed her, and I never even noticed." After the USJ would be over, the next day would finally come around, and Izuku, having woken up nothing but the thought of being utterly embarrassed by the Nomu on his mind, he would get up out of bed, cast in both arms, as Izuku, flying off towards the direction of the biggest dump in Japan, would land on top, green energy swirling around him, as Izuku would think that if that was as weak as he was last time, he'll just have to force himself to be stronger, even if that means every single fiber in his body would be aching from the pain. And so, lifting up every single object that would be inside of the dump, metals, car, garbage, scrap, you name it, the dude would start lifting the ground itself. Izuku, pissed off, memories ringing through his head as blood starts seeping from his nose. Izuku, recognizing that he might be overdoing it, would think to himself that had he been training like this before, that incident never would have happened. So pushing his body beyond its limits, Izuku would continue training his telekinesis quirk, eventually passing out on the floor, a man arriving to check up on Deku. Kid, are you alright?" the man would say. Izuku looking at him as he would ask Izuku what the heck he thought he was doing there. Izuku looking at the man, saying that he's sorry, he was just training. The man would say, "What kind of training could you do at a junkyard?" Izuku looking towards him and saying that he was lifting up every object and trying to crush it simultaneously. The man, putting one and one together, realizing, "Oh, so you're the cause of those noises," would tell Izuku that he has to get lost, that this isn't a place for children, cool quirk or not. Izuku, hearing that, would tell him that he could be of use. If they just let him train here, then maybe he could use his quirk to actually help them out. He could save them a lot of time working. And the man, hearing that, would go, "Hold on now. hold on, I didn't know you was about to help me out. So he would literally proceed to be like, you know what, kid, I'll let you stay here so long as you help out with the workload. And he would pretty much tell Izuku that if he can manage to do like a certain task he would give him, then he'll let him stay. With Izuku doing it with flying colors, and a week eventually coming and going would finally lead Izuku to the final day, where Izuku would wonder just how much he's grown, and attempting his max output again, Izuku would realize that he had only added about 5 tons to his general weight. Izuku would be stunned. What? I've been pushing my body, breaking it beyond its limits, and this is all I could master? Izuku with this thought would start to think that maybe he's hit a wall. Maybe this is just the limits of a quirk, since after all, quirks are just extensions of a person. Maybe this is just his limit, he would think. And as that thought would ring in Deku's head, the entire area would start shaking, him being pissed off. Because if this is his limit, then how's he ever gonna beat All Might? That realization would hit Deku like a truck. And when he would return to school, Izuku would feel very different. Because instead of having his brash, loudmouth personality, Izuku would just kind of silent, feeling as though everyone was just judging him. But in reality, that would have been in his head. And by the time that all the extra students that would have came to check out the competition would come, the class would expect Deku to do something brash, but no, he just uses his quirk to move some people aside and walks on, not saying nothing. Uraraka, noting this, would go sit by Deku at the cafeteria, asking Izuku what's wrong. Izuku simply faking a smile and saying that he's fine, as eventually the time would come where they would all be ready to take the UA Sports Festival, Bakugo giving the speech, once more saying that he would win, as now we would have the first event, and as Izuku would sit there on the starting line, he would once again just sit there silently, mulling over the fact that he's hit a limit. It was almost as though he could hear the voices of everybody that's ever told him he was weak, telling him that that's it, that's all he could do. And Izuku, thinking that, would be pissed. So at the moment the starter's pistol would blow, Deku immediately would use his telekinesis quirk to hold everyone back, flying past the finish line before anybody could even move. Watching this, everyone would be stunned, wondering what's going on with everybody else. Present Mike being the only one to recognize. And that's Izuku Midoriya for you. He used his telekinetic quirk to hold everybody back while he got first place. That's a pretty smart move if I say so myself, wouldn't you say, Aizawa? Aizawa would say, yeah, it was a pretty good usage of his quirk. Pretty much a guaranteed way for him to get first place. Just what I'd expect from the son of the number 2 hero, Tornado. At this comment, everybody would go, wait, he's the son of number 2? People being like, wait, she had a son? And conversations going crazy throughout the arena. Yeah, didn't you guys see? A long time ago in the first hero incident she ever was a part of, she was holding a baby. Don't you guys remember? And so people would be like, oh, that's him. That's the baby. He grew up to be a freaking hero. The crowd would go nuts, cheering Izuku on like crazy, as Izuku would simply remain silent after that win. And with everybody else finally clearing the obstacle course, this is when the next event would be announced, the Cavalry Battle, which would actually change a lot given the fact that Izuku's showing in the last event would actually lead a lot more people to wanting to join his team. So Izuku's team would be consisting of Izuku, Uraraka, Mei Hatsume, and Tenya Ida. But in this version of events, I just don't think he would view Izuku as a rival, more of as someone to strive to be like. Plus, it would definitely help the fact that he's seen Izuku acting a bit off lately. So wanting to help him out and give him a talking to, that would be the formation of the team. However, Izuku simply giving bland, dry responses would simply hold out both hands sitting on top of everybody's head, as he would cause all of the headbands to begin floating up in the air, a couple of people catching them before they would fly off, mainly in the more important groups, with Izuku taking the headbands from all the sucky groups, Shinso included, mind you. This means that characters like that would be eliminated instantly, and only the big hitters would be left in the 1v1 battles. So with Izuku using his telekinetic quirk to keep everyone at bay, the team would pass, simply counting down the seconds, everybody being like, that was awesome, Izuku, and him kind of just nodding and being like, yeah, it was pretty good. After this would happen, Uraraka would look sad and be like, something's really wrong with Izuku, Ida. We need to help him. And Ida, looking at Izuku's back, would say, yeah, there's definitely something wrong with our classmate. His temperament hasn't been the same, and his attitude hasn't as well. Yeah, I've noticed, Uraraka would say, to which Ida, looking towards her, would ask what they're gonna do. And she would say, honestly, she doesn't know. As much as she would consider herself an Izuku friend, she doesn't know if that's a two-way streak. And Ida, hearing this, would recognize that he's not so sure either. After this would take place, We would then cut to Izuku waiting in the waiting lounge, with all of his classmates around him, the ones who passed of course, being like, "Oh, we did awesome! Can't wait to see what the final round is." Izuku simply saying that the final round is going to be 1v1s like every other year, with people being like, "Oh, well, I hope I don't match up against you, Deku." Him kind of just like nodding and being like, "Yeah, sure. You know, still in his head, feeling as though people were judging him or thinking lesser of him due to that loss he took to the Nomu, but in reality, you know, nothing like that was happening. And that would be the reason that Izuku went so hard in the first two events, wanting to show that he's not weak, that he's much stronger than everybody. And when these 1v1 battles would start, you guys are going to be seeing just how far Deku's about to take it. Because bro's about to pull out the Cobra Kai motto and hit them with the strike hard, strike first, no mercy. Can I get a huh? Yeah. I'm sorry. Anyways, eventually Todoroki and Bakugo would both enter the room, each just kind of mean mugging each other, walking over towards Deku, as Todoroki would make a declaration that he was going to be defeating Deku in the 1v1 battles. Deku would say that that is if he can make it to the finals, but he'll be waiting. And then Bakugo would speak up next, going, "And don't get ahead of yourself, Deku. Just because you won last time doesn't mean you'll be able to beat me again." To which Deku, looking at Bakugo, would be like, "We're not even in the same league. I'll let him slide because he's the number 3 hero's son, but you're a nobody. So why don't you get lost and let the big dogs do the talking?" To which Bakugo, grabbing Deku by the shirt, would say, "The hell did you say to me?" And Deku, looking at him straight in his eyes, would say, "You heard me, Kachan. We're not even in the same tier." But ladies and gentlemen, that's where my section of the story is going to be done, because remember, it's a collab video, so my boy's going to take it from here. Trust me, he's about to go crazy. He's made his own videos on his channel, which you guys can find down below in the comment section, in the description, or you could just look up Ultra Iconic Man. And speaking of his channel, it would mean the absolute world to me if you guys could go show him some support, show him some love. Nowadays, we don't have too many what if creators, and me being somebody that loves listening to what ifs, it's very hard to find them nowadays with so much slop being out there. But this guy, I mean, dude, he's just a breath of fresh air. Go check out his channel, leave a subscribe for me, and show him as much love as possible in the comment section. But like I said, that's been it for me. Ultra, take over, bro.
As Deku prepares himself for his match against Todoroki, he feels it again, that slight feeling eating away at the back of his mind. "Will I win?" it whispers into his ear. His memory returns to the fight against the Nomu. He feels nausea come over him for a second, reliving the painful experience. However, the feeling passes and he's able to push those thoughts out of his mind. He wouldn't lose. That fight was just a fluke, he'd think. Then, the fight finally arrives. This is absolutely the most anticipated battle of the event, even though it isn't even the finale. Everyone wanted to see the children of the number 2 and number 3 heroes fight. Deku puts on his confident face and erupts from the tunnel, taking flight and spreading his arms to uproarious applause. Shoto isn't nearly as flamboyant, and he practically drags his feet to the arena as he walks. He isn't interested in inheriting his father's rivalries. Deku lands on the concrete across from Todoroki, his arms crossed, unimpressed by the boy. "What's the matter? Worried you're gonna get your ass beat?" he yells out, trying to taunt Todoroki, but the ice boy just shrugs wordlessly. "Insightful," Deku replies snarkily. It's then that the bell rings and the fight starts. Shoto opens with his giant ice pillar as usual. It engulfs the arena, with Deku seemingly trapped inside. But then, a cracking could be heard as the iceberg begins to crack before shattering, sending chunks flying. Todoroki tries to dodge them all, but gets hit in the gut by a basketball-sized chunk, forcing him to his back. This is when the first glimmers of emotion peek through the boy's icy demeanor. He grunts as he lands, his face contorting with anger as he sees the cross-armed Deku still standing in the same spot as before. He cocks his head before saying, "Is that really all the son of the number 2 hero has to offer? I gotta say, even Bakugo put up a better fight," he says, laughing to himself. Shoto rockets up from the ground, his right side now beginning to let off some steam. "Oh good! Are we gonna see the appearance of a real quirk?" Deku asks, hopeful to see Endeavor's power on display through his son. But hearing this, Shoto suppresses his fire, calming himself down. He then changes up his strategy, slamming his hands onto the ground, creating an icy mist. He engulfs the arena in what looks like a blizzard, ironic, obscuring himself from view. Deku just scoffs as he waves his hands in the air, casually blowing away the icy storm. But when he looked at where Todoroki was, the boy had vanished. Deku looked around himself, preparing for a sneak attack, but Todoroki was nowhere to be seen. It's then that from above, Deku feels himself get completely clobbered. Todoroki had come from above, landing a punch from the sky on Deku, then blasting Deku in the face with another colossal iceberg. The icy boy must have used an ice pillar to launch himself into the air, letting it get destroyed when Deku blew away the blizzard. Deku gets pushed all the way to the edge of the arena before he's able to stop himself, his nose beginning to slightly trickle blood. Ugh! Deku says in disgust as the liquid drips from his bruised face. Deku's face contorts into a scowl before he looks up at Todoroki, who is already charging back in. However, Deku is fed up and puts his hand in the air before bringing it down flatly, with Todoroki being smashed flat against the ground, pinned by Deku. So we're resorting to deception now? So desperate already! Deku mocks before blasting Todoroki with a psychic blast, sending him flying towards the opposite end of the arena. He gets to his hands and knees before Deku lifts him off the ground, floating up to meet him, staring down Todoroki. Such a proud but sad boy, Deku says, before preparing himself to toss Shoto out of bounds. However, that last insult just sets Todoroki off, all the mockery finally causing him to crack. He unleashes his fire side, completely uninhibited. The sheer amount of fire nearly burned the crowd of onlookers to a crisp. When the smoke clears, Deku is laid out in the arena. He groans in pain, smoke coming off of his clothes. He was not expecting that. Adrenaline then shoots through Deku's body as he feels that sensation again. Fear. He was afraid he was going to lose. Frantically, he shoots up from the ground, looking at Shoto, who was making his way over, his right side ablaze. Angrily, Deku just punches the air. No tact, no finesse, just power, and completely blasts Todoroki into the wall of the arena. The crowd goes silent seeing the violent display. Just another weakling, Deku says under his breath before leaving the arena. Deku's mood remained sour for the rest of the event. And even when his fight against Bakugo inevitably came, Bakugo opened up with a massive attack, seeing this as his opportunity to prove himself. But Deku is done playing games. After his match with Todoroki, he just wants this to be over. So he straight up just grabs Bakugo out of the air with telekinesis and hurls him back into the tunnel he had emerged from. Deku scoffs and looks out at the disappointed crowd before, enraged, he addresses them. Are you not entertained? Is this not what you came to see? What, did you really expect me to dumb myself down just to give you all a show? Get over yourselves, he says snarkily before flying back into his own tunnel to an uproar of booing. Deku could care less what those morons thought. On his way to wait for the medal ceremony, he encounters Todoroki returning from Recovery Girl. Deku rolls his eyes as he sees the boy, prompting Todoroki to speak up. What's your problem, man? He asks. Deku just gives him a look of, are you really trying to go for round 2 right now? Before just pinning Todoroki against the wall with his quirk. Maybe I didn't make it clear in our last fight, but I'm done with you. You're beneath me and not worth my time, he says coldly. I bet that made you feel real big and strong, didn't it? Todoroki responds, prompting Deku to intensify his grip on the boy. What the hell did you just say? He responds angrily. You know, it's actually hilarious. You and my dad hate each other so much, but you're his perfect son, the child he wanted. What are you gonna do? Call me mean names? Beat me up? Kill me? You've got issues. Stop making them everyone else's problem, Todoroki says, unintimidated. Deku just drops the boy, scoffing before leaving. While waiting in the locker room for the medal ceremony to begin, Endeavor would ambush Deku, standing in the doorway, attempting to intimidate the boy. You showed zero honor in that fight! How dare you bring shame on my family like this? He yells at Deku, but Midoriya just looks up at Endeavor with an expression of disgust. Cry, bitch, and moan all you like, oh great number 3 hero. It changes nothing. It looks like losing just runs in your bloodline, Deku says coldly. This prompts Endeavor to throw out threats, of course that he couldn't and wouldn't make good on, before storming off. When the medal ceremony began, Deku stood next to an infuriated Bakugo, who had to be restrained. The crowd falls silent when Deku is given his medal, and he just flies off to leave, not feeling like much of a winner. When Deku gets home, his mom doesn't know whether to congratulate or scold him. However, her softer nature takes over. Moving forward, it'd now be time for the hero internships. And of course, Deku goes with his mom. In this version of the story, Deku wouldn't know about Ida's brother, but it would just so happen that Deku and his mom would be patrolling Hosu City when the Nomu attack would strike. Deku would start shredding these creatures apart when his mom would tell him to dial it back. Deku just kind of rolls his eyes, and when the opportunity presents itself, he goes off on his own. He has some steam to blow off anyway. While flying over the city, he sees a couple of people in an alleyway. He doesn't think much of it at first, until the distinct reflection of red glints in his eye from the moonlight. Blood red. Deku bolts down to the alleyway to see what's happening when he runs into the hero killer and Ida. Deku looks on with concern for a moment. This was somewhat of a visceral scene. Then, the flames of Deku's anger lick at the back of his mind once more. He walks up to the hero killer unimpressed. Stain now takes notice of Deku, threatening the boy with his blade if he doesn't back off. Ida then sees Deku and yells out to him. "Get out of here, Midoriya! He's mine!" yells the engine hero. But Deku just kind of makes a "sure, buddy" expression before speaking. You're done, bud," Deku says before flinging Ida out into the sidewalk. Then, he turns his attention to Stain, who had actually lunged at Deku when he sent Ida away. But Deku simply just waves his hand as he approaches, launching Stain's knife into the alley wall. Stain jumps back, retrieving another one of his many cutting implements. Seeing this, Deku sighs. "How many knives does a guy need?" asks Deku before he throws both his arms out, and every single blade and knife on Stain's body flies away from him. He then holds his hand out like Darth Vader, and the once mobile Stain finds himself grasping at his throat, gasping for air. Deku holds this position, bringing the hero killer down to his eyeline. "I'll level with you, hero killer. Today is just not your day. I've got a lot of pent-up aggression, and just a perfect target to take it out on," Deku says, half smiling as Stain widens his eyes, frantically trying to escape. "You hero trash! You bring shame to the name!" He chokes out before Deku speaks again, tightening his grip on Stain's throat, cutting off his speech. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "Careful not to choke on your convictions," Deku taunts, before he starts just ragdolling Stain. Deku just starts slamming him against dumpsters, walls, the street, just beating the utter shit out of Stain. And realistically, there's no way for the hero killer to combat a power like this. His bones snap like twigs under the assault. Deku feels his power, his strength, but as his exhilaration wears down, he can feel something else. He stops his assault, now looking at the brutally beaten Stain. He was contorted in a ball, desperately trying to defend himself. Deku feels guilt. Sure, this guy probably deserved it, but Deku just didn't like the feeling of beating someone to the brink of death. A chill runs down his spine when Stain speaks. "Please, no more," he croaks out, his face swollen to the point of being unrecognizable. Deku just drops him to the ground, shame plaguing his mind. Did he really just do that to another person? He starts to freak out a bit. What would his mom say if she found out he did something like this? What would All Might say? Deku can't parse this idea and decides to leave an anonymous tip to the police about a very incapacitated hero killer. Deku walks out of the alleyway, shaken when he sees Ida. The boy wasn't injured enough to warrant saving, so Deku figured he'd either leave on his own or get taken by the police to get treated when they arrived. Deku flies off, leaving Ida alone with Stain. This was a pretty significant oversight, as Deku didn't actually know why Ida was fighting Stain, figuring that they had just encountered each other and Ida was trying to save that other hero in the alley. He had no idea that Ida wanted to kill Stain. So when Ida regained movement in his body, still fueled by rage, he wrenched Stain's blade from the alley wall. It's then that Stain regains consciousness, his body still unable to move from the beating he had just taken. He sees the hero limping ever closer. The hero killer tries to crawl away, but it's no use.
No! Only All Might is worthy to kill me! Stay back!
Stain yells, but it falls on deaf ears. As the boy gets within range, the camera pans up, and all that can be heard from the alleyway is blood-curdling screams. Deku wouldn't find out about what happened with Ida until several days later, when before returning to school from the internships one morning, Deku was watching the news. They were talking about the brother of Ingenium, who had killed the hero killer all on his own. Deku reads the headline and instantly realizes his mistake. He drops his spoon into his cereal. "Oh God," he says under his breath. It sounded like Ida had taken all of the credit for what happened to Stain, either because he didn't want Deku to be involved, or because he really just didn't care about correcting the media. Either way, he had been arrested, and Deku can't help but blame himself. If he had been more responsible with his powers, Ida wouldn't have ruined his future. Deku had no idea about Ida's brother until now. Maybe if he had paid more attention to his classmates, he could have helped him, he thinks. The shame plagues him, but he still has to go to school regardless. He doesn't mention a thing about Stain to anyone, but he can hear people talking about it. It's then that Aizawa would enter the classroom, his eyes looking puffy, like he had been crying. He steps up in front of the class before speaking in a somber tone. "I'm sure you've all heard the bad news by now, and I'm sorry. I have completely failed each and every single one of you," he says. The class is taken aback by this, but he continues. "I have failed to protect Ida. I knew what happened to his brother. I should have been more diligent. I shouldn't have let him intern. I won't fail any of you like that ever again. It's my fault he'll never be able to be a hero, and I can only pray that he gets the help he needs. I'm so sorry," he says before leaving a moment of silence. For the following weeks, there's a bit of a strange mood, but in the lead up to the finals, the class focuses back on their studies and hero training. Of course, Bakugo and Deku are paired up for training, and Ida is replaced by Shinzo, a bit of a silver lining of Ida's absence. Deku and Bakugo's relationship has never been worse, with Bakugo honestly harboring fear for Deku despite his outer defiance, and Deku is a shadow of his former self after the past several incidents. He doesn't know how to be a hero anymore. The commonality being, they both have something to prove, but against their shared foe, they'd have to be intelligent. They didn't bother to speak to each other before the match, nor when they stood there, waiting for the exam to begin. Then, All Might comes out fast. He destroys most of the city in front of him, with Deku shielding himself and himself only. Bakugo goes flying back, and as Deku looks back, All Might is already on top of him. He kicks Deku's shield bubble like a soccer ball, shattering it and sending Deku flying into a building. Bakugo comes from above, but All Might grabs his leg and chucks him at the recovered Deku, who had just outstretched his hands to grab at All Might. They collide, downing them both once more. With the boys down, All Might claps his hands together, blasting the building with it collapsing on the two of them. As the walls come tumbling down, Deku blasts a discreet hole out the back, with Bakugo trying the more direct approach. He blasts the front of the building down, bursting out onto the scene. He extends his hands towards All Might, setting off one of his fully charged gauntlets. This is the first attack they're able to land, sending All Might flying back. As he recovered midair, Deku comes flying in from behind and spikes All Might into the ground. He tries reaching down to grab the hero, but he's too fast, bursting forth from the ground already at eye level with Deku. The frightened boy extends his hands instinctively, trying to send All Might flying back, but All Might just grabs his hands and gives Deku a taste of his own medicine, slamming him into the ground below. Bakugo sees this and speeds in, trying to use his other gauntlet while All Might was distracted, but the hero swings his body around, clobbering the device, shattering it. All Might grabs Bakugo by the face and starts descending fast. Deku starts to get up from the crater he had just created, when from above, he sees something incoming, fast. He tries to bring out his shield, but he's hit too fast. All Might comes down from the sky, slamming the boys into the ground, now holding them down. And with that, the exam timer goes off. They had both failed. They both are enraged at this. Just one more failure, Deku thinks to himself. All Might tries to give them at least a lesson from this.
Listen, you two boys. You lost here today because of your inability not just to function with others, but specifically with each other. Being a hero is about more than throwing your weight around. Sometimes you need to work with people, and sometimes you need to work with people you don't like, maybe even hate. For a real hero, it doesn't matter who they are teaming up with, whether it's the person they hate most in the world or the love of their life. They will function as one cohesive team because they know the consequences of failure. I hope you've learned from this loss. Otherwise, you have a long and difficult road ahead.
All Might says. The two boys aren't in a receptive mood at the moment, but Deku does think about this after he cools off. He thinks about all the mistakes he's made. Maybe he had been throwing his weight around a bit. If he hadn't, maybe things would be different with Ida. Deku's personality somewhat lightens up as the next couple of weeks follow. He's trying to be less abrasive, and honestly, more like his mom. Although, he's not quite there. At the very least, he's done just threatening people with his powers. Maybe a little more control would be a good thing. After all, reflecting his behavior off of what he had learned from Bakugo just didn't seem to lead anywhere fruitful. The day finally comes when it's time for the class to go on their next major hero training field trip. Aizawa goes on to explain the forest training camp that the whole class would be attending. Deku still struggles to talk to a lot of the kids in his class, especially Todoroki. He can't help but feel guilty for what he had done to the boy. Same with Bakugo even. He had become a bully. Deku hates to admit it, but he was just lording his power around like a villain. Deku doesn't really talk to anyone on the bus ride over, and when the mud golems attack, sure, he doesn't want to be a bully anymore, but he cannot be bothered to destroy an army of these guys on the way to the camp. So he straight up just flies there without the others. Things at the camp go as they normally would, with Deku being punched in the nuts by Koda, and Deku would have to hold back all his strength and rage to stop from blasting this kid into next week. Deku would learn about Koda's parents from the Wild Pussycats, giving Deku a bit of sympathy for the brat. They all train their quirks, with Deku feeling like he's just running into a wall here. For some reason, his powers aren't really making much progress. They were super strong, but set at a certain level. This really bothers Deku, as he's taken away with the other students who failed their finals. However, he doesn't have long to think, as the attack on the school begins. Eraserhead and Vlad are able to handle Dobby, but Deku realizes something. He hasn't seen Koda around the camp for hours. That kid would disappear at the weirdest time of day for hours at a time, but now is definitely the worst time to be MIA. Deku just runs out to Eraserhead. "Koda is missing! We need to tell everyone what's happening!" he says frantically. "You're right. I'm going to get Mandalay and warn everyone. You all stay put," Eraserhead orders. But Deku speaks up. "What about Koda?" he asks. "I'll make sure everyone knows about him too, but I won't send a student into an active attack," Aizawa says firmly. "What's the point of being a hero if I can't save one kid? I need to do this," Deku insists. Aizawa looks around, not really having the option of subduing Deku or staying to argue given their current time constraints. "Fine, only you, and do not let anyone know about this. You went rogue. That is your story. And I don't need anyone else getting any ideas," Eraserhead says, before dashing off in the direction of the main camp. Deku instantly takes to the sky. He didn't need to scour the whole forest, just the parts that Koda could reasonably get back and forth from. He'd want to be somewhere secluded, where no heroes would find him, but it'd be somewhere interesting. He is a kid after all. He wouldn't just want to sit in the middle of some trees. It's then that Deku spots it, the cliff. That was the perfect spot. The boy comes flying in, only to see his worst fear. Muscular stands over Kota, threatening to kill the boy. Deku ramps his speed up to the max, and before he makes contact with the brute's exposed back, he blasts the villain. The combination of speed and power sends Muscular flying into the side of the cliff. Deku has a moment to address Kota. "Run!" he shouts before turning back to the recovering Muscular.
I gotta admit, kid, I actually felt that. You've got my attention now. Let's see if you last.
He taunts threateningly, his skin beginning to tear, revealing the red, fibrous muscles underneath. Kota, who had been scared stiff, now feels his blood rushing to his limbs as he starts to flee. Muscular sees this, and with his newly formed muscles, launches himself at the boy.
Leaving so early? The party just started!
He yells, but Deku isn't just gonna stand around and do nothing. He grabs Muscular by the legs, using his power. However, it takes everything Deku has just to stop the villain's trajectory. He notices that, in his exhaustion, a bit of blood starts to trickle down from his nose. This was not good. Deku lets out an exhausted breath before he looks up, only to see Muscular had changed targets. He's barely able to get any kind of barrier up before getting sent completely off the cliff ledge. The bubble had warped under the impact, with Muscular's fist actually making contact with Deku's body, breaking several of his ribs. He's able to catch himself through the pain before he lands on the rocky ground below. Muscular looks back towards where Kota had been, and thankfully, the boy was long gone. Shrugging, he just launches himself off the cliff after Deku.
He'll come later,
thinks Muscular sadistically. Deku lays on the ground for just a moment when he sees something launch off the cliff. In his daze, he isn't able to figure out what it is for a sec. Then, it clicks. He blasts forward like he was Iron Man, just trying not to be where he was when Muscular landed. Deku flies forth, smashing into a tree in his frantic dodge, and Muscular lands, sending out a shockwave, hitting Deku with the Air Force. Deku tries to recover before the villain, but in an instant, the villain's fist was punching him in the gut, cutting the tree in half that Deku's back was against. It felt like his shields were doing absolutely nothing. Deku blasts Muscular, making some distance, but doing zero damage to the villain. Deku begins lifting tree after tree, boulders, and even chunks of the earth itself, launching them at Muscular, hoping the barrage would tire the freak out. But before the dust even has time to clear, an even more bulked up version of the brute launches into the air. Deku tries to dodge to the side, but the villain is able to grab his leg while flying by. He swings Deku around like a ragdoll, absolutely shattering every bone in Deku's left leg, and nearly causes the boy to pass out from the blood pooling in his head. When they land, Muscular spikes Deku into the dirt, further breaking the boy's already crippled body. Deku is getting flashbacks to what happened with the Nomu. In a moment of pure primal fear and instinct, Deku's eyes glow for a moment as the cornea of his eye begins to almost melt. He reaches his hand out, now only seeing Nomu in front of him, and with everything he has, he blasts. And, miraculously, Muscular goes flying back, now with a softball-sized hole through his ginormous right shoulder.
Stay back!
Deku cries as he releases the massive force. Muscular is taken aback by the display of force, and grabs his now lame right arm.
Such a wasted effort! Aim for the head next time, moron!
He says as he approaches the horrified Deku. Deku tries to fly off, but Muscular catches him by his non-injured leg, slamming him back down into the ground painfully. Muscular begins stomping Deku's chest out, trying to completely crush the boy and kill him.
This fight was sure fun, but you've lost your novelty, and I think I can hear the main camp from here. It's a shame your sacrifice will be a total waste. You know, when I kill everyone including that kid back at camp. Assuming the others haven't beaten me to it. Ha ha!
He bellows, taunting Deku as he continues to stomp. Deku can feel his defenses failing. All it would take was one unblocked stomp to Deku's chest, and he'd be dead for sure. But that isn't what he's thinking about. No, he isn't thinking about how he's moments from death. He isn't trying to come up with any kind of excuse or reason. He isn't even thinking about the agonizing pain he's in. All Deku can think about is everyone back at camp. He had failed people left and right, using his power in all the wrong ways, and now, when he finally has the chance to do something right to save everyone, he won't let that chance slip away. "I won't let you lay a finger on a single one of them!" he yells, reaching down deep inside of himself. He had been desperate before, like when he fought Nomu, for his life, his own life, but this was something much greater. The strength one can achieve when fighting for themselves is nothing when compared to the strength of someone with everything to protect. Emitting from Deku's chest, a ginormous concentration of psychic energy flies out in every direction. The surrounding forest is flattened and Muscular goes flying back. Deku gasps for air as he feels the pain in his body get replaced with exhilaration. Whatever had just happened completely reinvigorated him. His bones were still broken, but he couldn't feel a thing with all this energy. Must have been the adrenaline. Then he was on a timer, he thought. Then he won't let this go to waste, he thinks to himself, steeling himself before he digs deep down once more. And when Muscular looks up, he sees something. A terrible tornado of sorts, and it was only getting larger. The brute tries to jump away before the pull brings him in, but the psychic pull is just too much for him to overcome. At this point, the tornado is so large that everyone in the entire camp/forest can see it, and those close enough witness as Muscular gets slammed over and over. It happens so fast it's impossible to count, but after the first minute, he's already completely unconscious. But the tornado doesn't stop there. It continues to grow in size. Inadvertently, seeing this, the villains all decide to retreat. They had what they wanted after all. And after a full 5 minutes of the tornado growing, almost threatening to engulf the camp, it suddenly stops, with 2 figures falling out of the sky. Deku is just barely conscious enough to pad his fall, but after that, all he gets are bits and pieces as he fades in and out of consciousness. Aizawa, Kaminari, and Kirishima were the first of the class to make it over to Deku. The students grab Deku and bring him back to the camp under Aizawa's instruction. The hero then takes a closer look at Muscular. He was somehow still breathing after that. Aizawa wouldn't have been surprised if every bone in the villain's body was broken. Aizawa just looks between the villain and where the tornado had been. "Quite the Tatsumaki indeed," Eraserhead says to himself, before using his scarf to bind the villain, calling over Vlad to drag him to the authorities. Deku wouldn't regain consciousness for several days, as Recovery Girl healed his injuries, but needed to induce a coma to ensure his energy doesn't get drained. When Deku did finally awaken, he learned about Bakugo's capture, and more motivated, powerful, and realized than ever, Deku makes it his mission to save his friend, whether he had help or not. Of course, he wouldn't already know about the plan All Might had made with the other heroes, so he'd go with Momo like the original timeline. But I think that's where my part is gonna end. I want to thank Xehther for having me on in this video. Getting exposure like this through him means the world to me. And I appreciate all of you, his fans, for being so supportive and kind. I read all of the comments on the What If Deku Was Invincible video, and I wanted to thank you all for being so kind and supportive. All of the new subscribers I got from that video, and the fact that I know people actually want to see what I make feels better than you could know. I don't want to drag this out for too long, so thank you, Xehther, and thank you, audience, for everything. With that, Xehther, take it away!
We cut back to the store to see Momo, Ida, Kirishima, and Izuku all shopping for new outfits. This is when out of nowhere Kirishima would say, "But Momo, weren't you able to create these clothes yourselves?" Momo shyly saying, "It was part of the mission, plus it helps us look cool." Todoroki would look at her and say, "So you just wanted an opportunity to spend your money?" As Momo would go bright red, and Izuku would say, "Alright, well it's finally time for us to get..." But this is when 2 dudes would walk over towards them, specifically Momo, going, "Hey beautiful, you think you want to spend the night with somebody like a real man?" Izuku staring at both men as using his telekinetic powers he slams them into a trash can and literally puts them to sleep. The group watching this would watch on in shock, with Kirishima in particularly going, "Whoa dude, you didn't have to knock them out." Izuku saying that they need to get going, that Bakugo could be in danger, he could be getting tortured right now, and instead they're wasting their times on drunks. Besides, he didn't hurt them that bad, he would say. Todoroki saying that maybe it's not such a good idea for Izuku to go with them. He has a tendency to be a loose cannon. But Izuku would stare at Todoroki and giving him a glare that he was about to say something, offensive or something. He would stop, staring at Todoroki and saying that he's sorry for how he's been acting. But right now, he's not thinking about being the strongest. He's just thinking about saving his he would say, before just saying that he's just thinking about saving Bakugo. The rest of the classmates looking at him with a bit of a smile as they all realized that Deku, well, he was back. Todoroki at this would nod as they would eventually make their way outside of the lands where the Nomus were. And this is when Kirishima, using his night vision goggles, would proceed to look inside. A terrified expression on his face, everybody staring at him wondering, what did you see? Until Kirishima would say, "Guys, you don't want to know what's in there." Izuku taking the goggles from him and saying it can't be that. But then he would see vats full of Nomus. As an expression of horror would fill his face, Kirishima would look down, scared, going, "See, I told ya." This is when out of nowhere they would recognize that heroes were in there, and Izuku would say, "Wait, the heroes are here." Kirishima, Todoroki would say, "What? Are you sure?" As Izuku would say, "Yeah, Mount Lady, Best Jeanist, all of the heroes are there, kind of like examining the situation." And with them all realizing this, they would start saying that maybe they didn't have to come after all. Them all started to make their way out of the cramped alleyway. That is, until suddenly an explosion would be heard, Izuku using his telekinetic abilities to not let it affect his classmates. So by the time the smoke would clear, they would have front row seats to the man standing before everything. All for one. Izuku, seeing this, would watch on as the man would go on to show a display of multiple quirks, using them to send not only Mount Lady flying, but a horde of heroes. Izuku noting that this is dangerous, and this man was clearly not to be trifled with. Izuku would stand still, hoping the heroes could put a stop to him. But this is when the villain would shoot out tendrils towards the direction of Best Jeanist, knocking him down on the ground, dang near killing him. Mount Lady using her ability to shield off the officers that had entered the room with them. And Izuku, watching this, unable to control himself, would then have Todoroki place his hand on him, almost as if to say, "Don't do it." But Izuku, unable to control what he knows he has to do, would fly over towards the air, screaming out, "Hey! Why don't you pick on someone your own size?" Lifting a bunch of rubble into the air and shooting it flying towards the direction of All For One. All For One in this moment would use his quirks to create barriers, and multiple of them. As he would say, "Impressive. You're the son of the number 2 hero. You seem to be in possession of such an incredible quirk. I'll be taking that from you." He would extend tendrils that would fly towards the direction of Izuku, Izuku's eyes glowing white, his body almost instantly going into a shock-like state, adrenaline rushing through his veins, because Izuku in this moment can tell this guy isn't like muscular. He's not like the Nomu, and he's definitely not like Shigaraki. He's on a whole nother level. Izuku, using his telekinetic abilities, would swipe at the air, causing the tendril shot out from All For One to break in half. And with that happening, All For One would stare off going, "Magnificent." However, as he would say that, All Might, lunging from the air, screaming out, "All For One!" would come in with a powerful blow, sending it crashing towards 3 barriers that All For One would have put up. And Izuku, taking advantage of the situation, would use his telekinetic abilities to latch on to the distracted All For One, beginning to slowly crush him with his hand, all the while All For One internally would say, "Strength booster times 3. Limb augmentation times 4. Kinetic booster times 6, as his strength would grow, and in one movement the man would release himself. However, not before All Might would be capable of landing a blow. He would send him crashing towards another building, All For One standing up with a clap, wiping his suit off of with the dirt, before looking to All Might and telling him that that was fun, to show him some more. while simultaneously opening like 6 black sludge portals, which would reveal not only the League of Villains, but Katsuki Bakugo, and Izuku immediately registering this, using his telekinetic ability, would start crushing every single member of the League of Villains under so much force that they wouldn't be able to get up. And as he would do this, he would grab onto Bakugo, shooting him into the air along with the rest of his classmates, as they would all blast off, and Todoroki turning behind him would say, "Don't you dare lose, number 2! Izuku smirking and coughing under his breath. Wouldn't dream of it. It's at this point that as Izuku would stare at the rest of the villains, he would continue pushing them down, a blast of cremation being shot toward him by Dabi, Izuku using his telekinetic ability to send that thing flying outwardly, telling him that he's just a bad matchup. All for One then shooting tendrils towards Izuku, All Might snapping them in half with him engaging All for One in a battle. However, it would become clear that All for One was struggling in this situation, and with him recognizing that at the moment he does not have the upper hand, he would use a gigantic catastrophe of an attack to destroy the building behind him, multiple citizens being injured from the calamity, as he would then go on to open the sludge portals underneath the remaining members of the League of Villains, Izuku saying, "Not so fast!" using his telekinetic ability to lift them up into the air and literally send them all flying at All for One. All for One, seeing this, would get pissed, grabbing onto Shigaraki's shirt as he would lunge towards him and holding him upwards, before a smile would appear on Izuku's face and he would cry out, "All Might, get the remaining citizens to a safe distance! I've got this!" He would then go on to create a tornado right in the center of everything, moving the axis of the winds in opposite directions, formulating a gigantic tornado that would start tearing at trees and buildings would start shaking. But within the epicenter of the tornado would be All for One and the villains, all being spun around circles like a freaking toy. Izuku using the rubble that All for One would have created to shoot it inside of there. The rubble hitting multiple of the villains, although All for One would be combining a multitude of quirks, shooting it at the epicenter of the tornado, destroying it. Izuku seeing this would stare at All for One, as having lifted up his hand, Izuku would aim to the sky, All for One looking up as a small meteor would come flying down on him, Izuku registering that if he would have used a larger one, which honestly he could have, that could have killed thousands of people. And so, this small meteor rampaging towards the direction of All for One would cause a shocked expression to appear on his face, as he would think, if that thing collides, I will die. So, placing up every barrier at his disposal, he would attempt to stop it. However, that wouldn't contain the force, and as the meteor would shatter straight through every single barrier, coming in flying with fire behind it, empowered by the power of Tatsumaki, it would crash down on All for One, leaving a splatter of blood where the man used to be. Izuku simply breathing heavily, as he would think to himself that was definitely going beyond Ultra, as he would fall to one knee and say that he needs to work on that. And so as the flying choppers in the air would have been flying, this is when they would see a meteor looking rock and just blood splattered. The news would have covered that Izuku Midoriya would have been responsible for the death of a villain. And shortly following the altercation, news outlets would begin covering the situation, some taking advantage of things and playing it as though Izuku was some sort of villains. So with the passage of time, Izuku would be suspended from UA for some time until eventually everything would be cleared up and UA would release a full-on statement, revealing the truths of All for One, the kind of villain he was, and how, unfortunately in that situation, when a hero is left no other choice, they have to make the difficult choice. So Izuku had to do just that. And Aizawa and the rest of UA staff inside of this call meeting would all bow down, saying that Izuku might not have just saved all of Japan, but the whole world at large. And so with everybody hearing this official statement, Izuku having his, his little pro hero career being halted for just a moment, would finally be allowed back at UA. Praise being wrung out for the number 2 hero's son, as we see Inko even in the video crying, thanking everyone for their support, because she knows that her son was no killer. He was a hero. He saved everybody. And as such, she had told them from the moment that this whole fiasco had started, which had ran on for about a month, give or take. So Izuku had missed the provisional hero exam that his other classmates would have taken, as well as the introduction to the big three, which is kind of a big deal, which means that now we get into the internships. And what's going to be happening during this timeline? Well, I'd like to say that what we're going to have take place is that since Izuku's going to be interning with the number 2 hero Tatsumaki, and just as we're aware, the Night Eye Agency will end up having their whole sting operation in the Shiseikai house, I'm gonna be saying that for this timeline, Izuku and Inko were both requested for the mission, and so they're able to go off, so we can get like the last official fight of the series, Deku versus Overhaul. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to add for some reason. The League of Villains, including Shigaraki, Kurogiri, Magma, Dabi, Toga, yeah, they're all straight up in jail. They're all in Tartarus, all separated in these crazy bunkers. And that's where they're going to be spending the rest of their days. Shigaraki has both arms tied up behind his back at all times, so bro can't even scratch his neck like he always does, which might even be the worst thing for him. But jokes aside, as soon as the sting operation would commence, Tatsumaki, aka Deku, would fly in there with Mirio, using his telekinetic quirk to smash through walls as if they were paper. And once they would finally make their way towards Overhaul, Izuku's eyes glowing white after having a month to train without any interruptions thanks to the fiasco that had happened, he would lift Overhaul into the air, him unable to make contact with anything, all the while Mirio would rush towards him and send a punch flying in his direction. Overhaul would be hit in the gut as blood would begin pouring out onto his mask, all the while simultaneously, Izuku would use his quirk to hold down all of his minions, completely leaving a 1-on-2 battle between Overhaul and Mirio, in which Mirio would land blow after blow after blow, Izuku making things even worse on the villain by literally slamming him into the fists of Mirio. So much so that it would look like the two were playing some sort of sick twisted game of piñata, and by the time that Overhaul was done, he would be completely unconscious. However, Izuku, not taking any chances, would float him up that entire time. Izuku walking over towards Eri, patting her on the head and saying that the heroes have finally come for her. The end. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so, and I mean so sorry that this video took so long to come out to you guys. It was supposed to have come out way earlier, but I ended up running into some complications that were just a bit inevitable. So the moment I had the chance to finish recording this video for you guys, which is currently 10:53, I did just that. That's my bad, y'all. But anyways, if you guys went on to enjoy this series, leave a like. Seeing as if this video manages to do well once again, then I'll probably be dropping some sort of Saitama Deku or Genos deck. But with all out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, show some massive support to my boy Plus Ultra Iconic Man, and have a good one. Peace.